Dina was a woman the world seemed determined to erase, but she refused to fade away. A black woman with piercing eyes and a smile that spoke volumes about her resilience. Dina had seen it all. From the subtle biases in her workplace to the harsher, glaring prejudices on the streets, she felt the weight of the world's judgments daily. And yet, there was one constant, one source of unshakable comfort: Thor. Thor, a stray dog with matted brown fur and patches of white, had appeared on a stormy night when Dina needed him most. She had just endured one of the most grueling days of her life, walking home under the weight of failures and frustrations when she saw him, a thin, soaking wet dog cowering under a storefront awning. His large, sad eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, it felt like he was silently pleading for help. Dina's heart broke for the creature, and she couldn't walk past him. She scooped him up, and from that night forward, Thor became her loyal companion, never leaving her side. The bond they shared was unspoken but deep. They had both been survivors of hardship, navigating a world that often overlooked their worth. For Dina, Thor was not just a pet, he was a symbol of resilience. No matter how hard life got, she always had him, and together, they could face anything. But one week, everything changed. Dina had poured her heart and soul into a project that she believed could change her career forever. Every detail was meticulously crafted, each step of the presentation thought through with precision. She had been preparing for this moment for months. Yet, when the time came to present her work to the team, her boss barely looked at her. His disinterest was palpable. The next day, Dina's project was presented as the brainchild of someone else, and she was given no credit. The betrayal stung, but Dina didn't show it. She returned home that evening, disheartened but determined. Thor greeted her, his tail wagging, but he sensed the change in her energy. She crouched down, running her fingers through his fur, whispering to him, "They won't break me, Thor. I don't know how, but I'll make them regret it." That night, she barely slept. Her thoughts were spinning, analyzing what had happened and how she could make it right. But beneath the frustration and anger, a flicker of hope remained. Maybe she hadn't lost yet. Maybe there was still a chance to reclaim what was hers. The following day, Dina walked into the office like a storm about to break. Her mind was sharp, alert to every conversation, every gesture. It was then that she overheard two colleagues speaking in hushed tones, standing in a corner of the office. Their words were almost imperceptible, but one word caught her attention: project. Curious, Dina moved closer, pretending to be absorbed in her work but listening intently. What she overheard caused her blood to run cold. The two were conspiring not only to steal her work but also to cover up something far more sinister. They mentioned emails, irregular payments, and something about keeping the whole thing under wraps. Dina's heart raced. This wasn't just about her project anymore. Something much bigger was at play, and if she didn't act fast, she could lose everything. Dina felt a weight settle in her chest. She was faced with a choice: to confront the people trying to erase her, risking everything in the process, or to walk away and let them win. But Dina had never been one to back down from a fight, and she wasn't about to start now. She could feel Thor's presence in her mind, a reminder of the promise she had made to him, to never give up. That night, as Thor lay curled up at her feet, Dina sat at her desk, determined to uncover the truth. She opened her laptop, the screen glowing in the dark room. Her fingers flew across the keys as she accessed company files and internal emails. It wasn't easy, the systems were complicated, and Dina had to move carefully to avoid detection. But she knew the systems inside and out, and she was getting closer to the truth. Hours passed, and Dina's eyes were growing tired, but she refused to stop. She knew that somewhere, hidden in the documents, there was evidence, something that would expose the fraud and the people behind it. Then Thor suddenly stirred, lifting his head and barking softly. His eyes were fixed on the door, his body tense. Dina froze. There was no one else in the house, but something about Thor's reaction sent a chill down her spine. She slowly rose from her chair and moved cautiously toward the window. The street outside was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights, but Thor's agitation didn't subside. Dina locked the door, checked the windows, and tried to reassure Thor. "It's nothing, buddy. Just my imagination." Deep down, Dina felt a gnawing sense of unease. Something wasn't right. The next day at the office, Dina's anxiety reached new heights. The atmosphere was different. Colleagues avoided eye contact, and whispers seemed to follow her wherever she went. As soon as she sat at her desk, an email appeared in her inbox. The subject was short and to the point. Notice of conduct. Dina's heart dropped. Was this it? Had they discovered her investigation? Was her search through company files being monitored? With a sense of dread, she opened the message. It came from Human Resources, summoning her to a meeting later that day. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was all part of their plan to silence her. Throughout the day, Dina's thoughts raced. She knew she had to act quickly, but she also had to be cautious. She had no idea what they knew, or how deep the conspiracy went. During lunch, she checked her phone again and saw a new message, an anonymous tip. Be careful. They know what you're doing. Dina's heart skipped a beat. Who could be sending her these messages? How had they known what she was up to? That afternoon, Dina entered the meeting room with her head held high, though inside, her pulse raced. It wasn't just her boss waiting for her. Two men in suits, strangers to her, sat at the table, their faces unreadable. Please take a seat, Dina, her boss said, his smile forced, his tone colder than usual. As Dina sat down, the tension in the room was palpable. The two men in suits exchanged sharp, calculating glances. Dina, we need to address some concerns, her boss began, sliding a folder across the table. We've received reports about your conduct. Dina took the folder but didn't open it. The trap was closing in on her. She had to tread carefully. Taking a deep breath, she asked, her voice steady, reports? What kind of reports? I'm curious to hear more. Her boss hesitated, but before he could speak, one of the men in suits interjected. Ms. Dina, you're being accused of unauthorized access to confidential information. If we find evidence, it could lead to serious legal consequences. The other man opened a tablet, showing login records and file access. Dina's stomach dropped. The evidence was fabricated, but how could she prove it? Interesting, Dina replied, arms crossed. This only means one thing. I'm getting too close to something you don't want me to find. Her boss slammed his fist on the table, losing patience. Stop playing games, Dina. You're digging your own grave. Just then, the phone on the boss's desk rang. He picked it up, his face drained of color. The brief conversation ended quickly, and he hung up in disbelief. You have 30 minutes to fix this, he said, turning to the men in suits. Get rid of her. Dina's heart raced. Get rid of her? What did that mean? Before she could react, heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. The door swung open, and a tall, confident woman in a federal police uniform entered. No one's going anywhere, the woman declared, holding up a warrant. This room is officially under investigation. The room fell silent. Dina's heart skipped a beat. She recognized the woman. It was a friend from long ago, a connection she had reached out to when she realized the danger she was in. As the men in suits tried to explain themselves, the policewoman cuffed them with precision. Money laundering, corporate fraud, and conspiracy to silence an employee. We have all the evidence, she said triumphantly. Dina stood, her legs feeling weak but her heart strong. My stolen project was just the beginning, she said. You were profiting off the work of others, but now it's over. The men were escorted out, and Dina followed her friend in the federal police out of the building. You're incredible, you know that, the policewoman said with a smile. But next time, let me know before you jump into something like this. Dina smiled, but before she could respond, her phone buzzed. An anonymous message appeared. Congratulations, but this is just the beginning. There are more people involved than you think. As Dina returned home, Thor was waiting by the door, his tail wagging in relief. It was as if he knew she was safe. She scooped him up, feeling the weight of everything she had just endured. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. Dina looked out into the distance, her gaze steady and unwavering, knowing that forces were still out there trying to silence her. But now, she had the courage, the drive, and the knowledge to face whatever came next. Days passed, and Dina's story spread throughout the office. Colleagues who had once ignored or undermined her now looked at her with newfound respect. Some even apologized or silently nodded in acknowledgement. But Dina no longer needed their validation. She had her own. Soon, she was offered a higher position. Her bosses, scrambling to save face, realized they had no choice but to promote her. But Dina saw through their plan. She didn't accept the promotion right away. Instead, she spent a week reflecting, consulting with Thor, who was always by her side. One night, as she sat quietly in her apartment, Thor at her feet, she made a decision. She would leave. No matter the promises or offers, the place she had poured her heart into had become a battlefield. Dina didn't want to survive in a broken system. The following week, she submitted her resignation. Her boss, shocked, asked if she was sure, reminding her of the promotion and opportunities. "I've already had my opportunities," Dina replied, calm but firm. "What I need now is my peace. And my peace isn't here." Thor was by her side as she walked out of the office building for the last time, the weight of years of mistreatment lifting. The world was open now, and she wasn't confined by the walls of that corporate world. She had survived, exposed the truth, and freed herself. With her head held high, Dina found a new path. She started her own consulting firm, empowering women and marginalized groups in the workplace. Her reputation as a fighter for justice grew, and soon, people from all walks of life sought her guidance on navigating their careers. Her bond with Thor remained strong, and together, they traveled the country, meeting new people and learning new things. Dina finally felt the freedom she had longed for. She was no longer just surviving a world that didn't understand her. She was a force, creating spaces for others to thrive. Standing on the balcony of her new office, overlooking a city she was now shaping, Thor at her feet, Dina realized the journey had just begun. There were still battles to fight, but she was no longer fighting alone. Every step she took, she knew she was making a difference, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been overlooked or silenced. As the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange, Dina smiled, knowing that no matter what came next, she had already won the greatest battle of all, the battle for her own freedom.